3940, the students were intensely interested, as they should have been, in the war that was unfolding in Europe. And we actually established a committee for refugee students.
But I think the thing that is true today and was true then is that we all need experience in two things. One, how do we get along and cooperate and help each other? And the other is, how do we take responsibility and provide leadership?
We had really no big problems. The big problem was how to make enough to support your wife and child, how to stay in school. I mean, the GI Bill took care of tuition and books, so all you had to do was support yourself. And some of the smarter ones got married and didn't have children, and they let their wives support them, and it worked out real well for them. But some of us weren't quite that bright, and we had children, and so we had to help in supporting us. But as far as campus and the problems of the school, we were up to 2,500 when I was there. Now you're up to 25,000. So to compare with our problems with yours, there's no comparison. And I figured that to put the four of us up here, based upon our total ages, and
Add us together.
And add them all together, and it's a big number.
My memory of that era is that it was relatively easy. The Korean War was going on, but I don't think that the campus was particularly concerned about that, other than we had some veterans still from World War II. We had most of us facing a military requirement as soon as we graduated, which is what happened to me. As soon as I graduated, the draft board said, it's your turn. But on campus, it was very peaceful, and we were on that beautiful Riviera campus, and my class was the last class to graduate on the Riviera. Big issues at the time. Big battle on campus because they wanted the fees to go up to $46. And the students were in a big uproar about that one. And it finally passed, so we had to pay $46. And I think the other big issue on campus would be, those darn Sig Eps, they served beer again at a party last night. We're going to have to put them on social probation. And so we would have this big student government powwow about what we were going to do to these folks that just couldn't stop drinking beer.
Join them.
Yeah, join them.
I think that year was what I call the end, or if not the end, certainly the beginning of the end of the Age of Innocence. Vietnam had not really become an issue yet. The Gulf of Tonkin incident did not occur until August of '64. Mario Savio's free speech movement on the Berkeley campus started in December of '64. But in '63, fall of '63 and spring of '64, UCSB was still a place that had homecoming parades on State Street, pushcart relays, beachcomber holidays, handsome fraternity men, as they were described in the yearbook that year, greeted sorority pledges who were wearing white skirts and white gloves and carrying bouquets of roses. That was sort of the spirit. It was a lot of fun. Life was good. The issues at the time, certainly among students, had not reached national issues and certainly not international issues. The campus issues at the time, publish or perish, that was a big issue among faculties. Whether students should be given the right to evaluate the faculty, a huge issue. That was the year that the regents lifted their ban on communist speakers, and so we had at UCSB early on Dorothy Healy, who was the secretary of the Southern California Communist Party, appear at UCSB. It was a monumental, controversial event in Santa Barbara. Banner headlines. But the issues were pretty benign until, of course, November 22nd, 1963, which was the assassination of the president. That was, here on campus, as it was throughout the country, an event that stopped everything and everybody in their tracks. For 3 solid days, we all watched black and white television nonstop. I remember them setting up a radio in the student center where we all heard the terrible news. This crowd may appreciate that at the time my girlfriend went to class and they announced that the president had been shot, and she thought it was me. So I don't think I can identify a better laboratory for real-life, real-world experience than student government. I endorse everything that David said about how it is a place where you can learn how things really work in the real world, and it has been a source of invaluable training for me in my community activities that I have been involved with ever since.
We were members of an organization called Cal Club, California Club, that we would meet with the chancellors and the president of the university. We were with Clark Kerr the night that he was basically fired by Ronald Reagan. And that was the beginning of an uproar on the campuses. In Santa Barbara, which was sort of the safe place to send your kids, Berkeley was radical and dangerous, and UCLA was huge, and it'd be the nice place you could sit there in your bridge group and say, oh yeah, Susie and Johnny are off at UCSB. But all of a sudden, when the governor came in and said he was going to slash the University of California twice the level of any other governmental departments because it was responding to the great antipathy toward Mario Savio with the majority of the people in California, he rode that as part of his campaign, and then when he came into office, get rid of Clark Kerr, immediately cut the budget of the University of California, and imposed tuition on the students. That led to a little march that we put together, and Greg was very involved in that because he was the year behind me and was vice president of our student body, where we took 10,000 students to march on the steps of the Capitol against Ronald Reagan and the imposition of tuition. Massive undertaking, where we had professors doing position papers on the impact of students at the university. We looked at the demographics. Where did we have students who were from Assembly and Senate districts whose parents had given major money and major donors to those assemblymen and senators? So when we went there, we strategically could have students call on their assemblymen and senators. We had asked Governor Reagan to come speak to us, and he had declined. He said that first he would not meet with any of us, but then he said he would meet with student body presidents. So we met with the governor for he said he'd give us 15 minutes. It was an hour and 15 minutes because I think, frankly, he was shocked that students could disagree with him but be civil and explore ideas and differences of opinion. So we go out to the steps of the Capitol where Dr. Harry Gewirtz was holding forth, talking about his feelings about the Reagan administration, when all of a sudden Governor Reagan walks into the middle of this. He said he wouldn't appear before us. His 2 aides, Phil Battaglia and Len Nofsinger, were saying, okay, the governor wants to speak now. And I said, well, we asked the governor, and we would have been happy to schedule him, but we really don't have time on the schedule now. So there's a picture in Newsweek with Len Nofsinger that looks like he is about to choke me. Governor Reagan is looking like the next face on Mount Rushmore because he's hearing Dr. Gewirtz just tear into the Reagan administration and their impact on higher education in California. And I said, if we have time at the end, we'll try to squeeze the governor in. So after he has to listen to the diatribes of all the liberal poli-sci and philosophy professors, I said, okay, Governor, you have just like that, 1 minute. So he gets there, and all of a sudden there's starting to be the chorus of boos and hisses. I stood up like that and raised my hands, and there was absolute silence. And it was the eeriest thing because I really think he expected to have the boos and show the brave governor of California going out with the national TV cameras going, and that he stood in the midst of this unruly and raucous crowd. But instead it was quiet. There was no applause at the end, just silence. And finally, Governor Reagan attempted to persuade the USC Scholarship Committee to give me a full ride to USC's law school because he thought if I spent any more time in the University of California, it'd just be another liberal out there.
Besides the assassination of Robert Kennedy, we had the assassination of Martin Luther King. We had the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. We had a president who decided not to run again. Incredible incredible things going on outside of the campus. And finally, the campus started reacting to what was going on around us. We also had no say in what was going on with academics on the campus. It was the first time that any student ever spoke before the academic senate to discuss changes in curricula, and that was something unique, and I think things have changed in that regard also.
One of my students, Kevin Moran, which there were these things of the burning of the bank and other things, and it wasn't the negative. Most students were for getting things done right. We were trying to put out fires when this student got killed, and the radio station was stopped, but they got it wrong because it only brought students out to put out fires. They were setting them in trash and everything, but it was a very positive thing. It wasn't a negative thing that they made it out to be. But anyway, overall, I hope you really make good use of your time here, and you can be a tremendous impact on the world if you make use of this time and don't waste it. And if the other thing, I heard something today which I don't think is right, and I hope you will be against that, and that you do not need beer on this campus. And if I had some say, I would campaign against it, because you need to be studying and not causing beer because one of the students died somewhere else. So with a negative thing, I've known to say my mind, you don't need beer, and you need to study. And that's it.
And that was, I think, how we felt that we had no voice. There was no voice in the determination of what classes were like. There was no voice in terms of what was going on in this country. There was no voice in terms of what we can do and how the university, if not the state, should be spending its money. And that was sort of looked at, and the results that came, we sort of tried to address a few issues. One was there was a whole restructuring, which I'm culpable in part for, of associated students. The Greeks were no longer given or granted their own seat on council. There was a whole restructuring that in my youthful arrogance, that 2 associated students had to take presidents, had to run because no one could follow me and do it singularly anymore. And there was a whole process of what is this about? How can we get people to have a voice? How can we get, make a change and make a difference? And the whole academic affairs board was set up where we actually graded and evaluated classes. The second thing was, even within the student body, I was prevented from speaking to the regents about disinvestment in South Africa. In part, one, a regent wouldn't grant me the right to speak. Secondly, the rest of the student body president's council was not in unanimity that this is an issue we wanted to force or raise, would sort of hold back the student rights issue. And when I gave my speech about increased funding for community affairs, the line that I had, that more attention is given to UCLA basketball teams than the problems in our cities, was stricken, and I was told specifically I could not say that before this august body. What happened as a result is, I think you begin to assume responsibility for everything. You understand what's going on in the world around you, and you get the sense of, my God, I'm responsible for this, or there's a leadership responsibility in terms of making history. And how do you do that? How do you make change? How do you define justice? And I think in many respects, looking back, those same contradictions I'm sort of toying with now in the labor movement. The second thing is the question of who gets to go to school is critically important, not just because tuition is increasing, not just because people's wages are being driven down and unable to afford it. It's because families' wages and benefits are being driven down, and that people are unable to take the time to go to the affordability to go to college because they have to help their family out with extra income. And those are issues that, in fact, if we're worried about the shape of this society, that have to be addressed in no better place than right here.
I was the first woman elected into student body president here at UCSB. I think there was someone who was appointed prior to me, but thinking back over that, I think for me, one of the real themes of the early 70s was the rise of feminism, the rise of the women's movement, and women's ability to move into positions of power. When I was a student, there were few, if any, women in power in the administration of UCSB, county government, state government. The Board of Regents, there were a couple of heiresses and wives, but no one who made it there because of their own abilities. And to be a woman and stand up, and I mean, we didn't even know what to wear to events because there were no models. There were no models. And that it was difficult too. I mean, it was before Title IX. It was when Title IX was just being implemented. And so today, when I see women in sports being as big a deal, or in some cases even a bigger deal than men's sports, it just makes me feel so wonderful how far we've come in terms of women's power in society and in government and in education and in sports. We were lucky, I think pretty much all of us at this table were lucky to come to the University of California at a time when the state had made a major investment in UC. When I look at students today trying to move from high school into the university or move from community college into the university and how difficult it is, it's clear that it's a matter of resources. There's not the supply and there's not the investment on the part of government and society in higher education that there was. So to me, that should be a major issue for students who are in school now, is making those benefits available to a broader spectrum of people. I think everyone who's ever gone to the university benefits from it, and it's really the ticket to changing classes and changing your life and that of all the people that you're responsible for, that you relate to. At a time where it was just after the civil uprisings in Isla Vista, and so we were building community institutions, working on trying to get Isla Vista incorporated as a city. We founded the Isla Vista Park and Recreation District and put resources into that. We learned all about local government, and that was really interesting because we got the student vote in 1972, and that was the first time that students were able to vote. We were 18-year-olds could vote. Boy, we thought that was going to change the world. We thought that was the end. We worked for McGovern for president, and I remember the Davis Aggie newspaper, their headline the day after the election was, "McGovern sweeps Massachusetts. Victory in D.C. seems certain." We totally passionately believed in that, but we really did affect the politics here in Santa Barbara County. We changed our assembly member, our state senator, our board of supervisors changed as soon as we got the student vote here. So that really, I think, gave us power. We ended up getting a student regent so that student body presidents wouldn't have to fight to be able to speak before the regents. And I think you'll hear from everybody on these panels today that their student government or their student activism experience gave them some leadership development experience and experience in advocacy that they've used continuously throughout their careers up until today and ongoing in their lives.
So when I was active here, I wanted to build up some institutions that we thought could make the world a better place. I was active in starting the Isla Vista Food Co-op and the Student Housing Co-op, and even on a more practical basis, the AS Bike Shop, because we thought we were being ripped off by those horrible, profit-seeking bike shops in Isla Vista. We were also very involved in the Isla Vista Cityhood campaign, as Abby alluded to, because we really wanted to take power and have a city government of our own, make our own decisions, live our own life. We really had this feeling that we could do things better. A challenge to today's students, I would just throw out a question: what are you personally doing to make things better in a lasting and tangible way? At the end of your involvement in college, particularly if you're in a leadership position on Ledge Council or the student newspaper or KCSB, What are you doing that's really going to have a tangible impact and make the world a better place? That's my challenge to you.
We had full access to the UC regents. I gave a talk to the regents about getting more housing because campus enrollment was on the way up from, I think it was 12.5 or something, going to 15. I'm sure I'm off a little bit. The regents were very responsive. With just a little bit of urging, the regents approved money and built graduate student housing to increase the housing stock. In those days, housing was an issue. As I mentioned, my sophomore year, I had a room on Del Playa for $129 a month. Student fees were about $130 a quarter.
So when I got here, what I found was there was a lot of apathy. And, of course, this was post-Vietnam. There was a lot of discussions about student participation in the university process and UC investments in South Africa, which we worked on. But it was a lot of apathy. But those that were involved, the few of us that were involved, and this is what's followed me through life in terms of things, those that got involved politically still bickered. Even though generally agreed with things, a lot of the students agreed, the personalities would get in the way, and we'd have these huge arguments and discussions, both at Ledge Council, over stupid issues that became more personal. And I always felt like we didn't unite the way we could have united because we were more interested in whatever it was, ego or petty issues. It was a very white campus, both in terms of students but also in terms of administrators. And we tried to get more diversity. And one of the things that we demanded to the chancellor at the time was that there ought to be more diversity at the higher levels of the university. And I hope that has changed since the time that I was here. But at that time, it was pretty sterile in terms of people at the top. And one of the things that we used to argue about and upset about was that, we'd have these not term limits, we'd have this 1-year term. And the administration, if you had an argument, it could always weigh you out because you're leaving. And that was always kind of an injustice, but it was just sort of reality. And I just find it fascinating that we now have the same kind of stupidity. There's nothing you could do about students because of the fact that we're in 1 year, freshmen 1 year, and we move up to and graduate in 4 years. But the fact that they did this in the legislature sort of destroyed a lot of the things that could be done in the legislature because everyone's got term limits and you got to be in and out so quickly.
We were concerned about the University of California's ties to the UC weapons labs. I know we organized a lot of students to go to regent meetings and try to, and we were always trying to get the regents to vote to sever the ties to the labs, claiming that they had no real oversight, and we were basically just selling the good name of the university to let the government develop nuclear weapons. History's shown that they didn't have very much oversight over those labs, and it's probably not a very healthy association for the university.
The issues were the nuclear weapons labs. We thought the regents sucked, which they did, of course. The university was in the midst of its long-range development plan. We made a huge impact going up to the Coastal Commission, lobbying on that. Diablo Canyon, nuclear weapons. Those were the sexy issues to get involved in. Those were the real-life issues. We got CalPERG on campus, which was a big difference. I publish a paper in Venice. It's very small, and we pick very few issues to go after. And when you do that and you pick the relevant issues, you can be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I think, like education, that's what we could have impacted. I've learned through the paper not to be so strident, so much more valuable, and that people that you may think disagree with you, you're always going to find points of agreement, and that's so helpful, and that's how you get things done, and you know your stuff, and that's why I don't demonstrate anymore, because I can be so much more powerful in other ways. If you can't have your ideals when you're young, when can you have them? That's what I leave with.
There was all of a sudden a big push to have the new chancellor be a chancellor of color or a woman chancellor. And that was a big theme on campus. I don't think there had been I don't know if there is, but there hadn't been a woman chancellor at that time or a chancellor of color here at the university. And with the pushings, they did bring in Chancellor Barbara Ewing. And I had recently heard that Barbara stayed here for about 5 years And that was nice that the students really were motivated in getting that. The other issues at hand were diversity in the form of MultiCultural Center, which it is wonderful to be here because this really started back in the early 80s, is the push toward the MultiCultural Center. And it's really nice to come back 15 or 17 years later and really see us here in the MultiCultural Center. So that was something that started with the students, and it's a fruit of all the work that's been done. Having control over your business is a necessity in order for it to achieve. And we worked very hard in understanding the history of the university center and the food center and the bookstore and everything that was basically supported and built by student monies. And at one time back in the 60s, because we called on some of the older Associated students and brought them back to campus and asked them, was there a time when you actually owned, and I know there's some administrators here, owned the university center and had authority to hire and fire and control and really have the management of the center? And there was a time in the 60s and 70s when students had the right and the ownership of the facilities to determine what goes into them and how they're being used. I just have to say, as a physician who walked into the university center and saw Wendy's downstairs and looking on every table on there, and the students are sitting there with French fries and burgers, you know, that's ridiculous. And there's no way that students should be forced to tolerate that type of issues. This type of event is a necessity for future Associated Student presidents. This video right here should be watched by every future Associated Student president, and they should learn the history of the Associated Students, because when you get into the AS president spot, you don't know anything about the history, and you are at a disadvantage. Once you know the history, all of that comes right up to play, and then you can work your issues out, and so you don't have to repeat the mistakes that were made in the past. Thank you very much.
My activism was primarily involved before the presidency, because once the Gulf War took place, we had all kinds of protests and so forth and so on, and I got arrested like when I just got elected and all kinds of things like that. But then all of my agenda items went out the door because it was the Gulf War and all the things that I wanted to push through, which was fighting the long-range development plan, which oddly I can't believe was 20 years before. I guess maybe it was a different one. But the one I wanted to do was to fighting all the housing on the bluff tops and all the engineering buildings and all that sorts of stuff. But unfortunately, lots of money have gone into all that sort of thing, and money kind of outweighs everything. And once again, unfortunately, Santa Barbara County has allowed a lot of the building that is what you see today. This campus is amazingly changed compared to what it was years ago. And it's not so much that it's bad, it's progress, I guess, and that's the way sometimes life happens. Working with other students, we were often reacting, which is bad, and I didn't like that. And that was one of the things I always fought against. It's like, well, let's come up with our own agenda and do what we want to make happen and make that happen. And yes, save a little time to react to certain things as things go on, but at the same time, interact and react, but also push forward your agenda. If you have certain things that you want to work on those things, and also at the same time fight against other things that you have to.
A lot of the issues that have been talked about already persist today. And, you know, maybe that's just the cyclical nature of life, but it's also a little bit disheartening. The consistent attacks on education that our students are battling with today. They're talking about cutting Perkins loans and, I mean, all these different programs. And, you know, at what point does it stop? I remember times when we were battling the first round of big fee increases. I think when I came into school, I think fees were $5.65 a quarter. And then we were hit with a, bam, 40% fee increase, bam, 20% fee increase, bam, like year after year after year. And really wondering how we can, and we were wondering at the time, and I still wonder how we can address these systemic issues And I'm not sure that I necessarily have an answer, but it doesn't mean that we didn't try.
Rodney King, the beating, subsequent trial, and all those things that taught the country about race, class, poverty was very much up. And I remember actually watching closely as Aaron led a large march through streets of Isla Vista, and how do you keep a group of people that are pissed off, and rightly so, constructive in the energy going in the right direction. And got to see some of that. Student fees, of course, were tripling, doubling again, tripling again, going up 5 more times at that time. And the issues of student control of that fee money and what it should be used for was a major piece. CalPERG had just been eliminated, actually. The fee mechanism had been eliminated as I came on. So that the success of bringing in, some folks invoked CalPERG, bringing that as a student self-assessed fee and a way to get some good work done on consumer advocacy and environment suddenly was taken away, and students had to get creative about what to do next. And that was very much tied in with the environmental issues, with the long-range development plan and all the massive building that had begun on campus. So what came out of that for me really was an opportunity to meet with all these different groups, and I did a lot of different jobs on campus and a lot of volunteer work, and ended up meeting folks that I really respected, and we put together a coalition called SAC, Student Action Coalition. And that was the first year of that group, and we put together a slate of officers, and I was the president on that ticket. And there were a whole bunch of folks that I'm still very much in touch with today and do work with today in this community that were part of that as well. So that kind of coalition building became very important as a strategy of how to get work done.
The lack of just institutional memory is devastating. It takes months and months and months to really sort of get your sea legs and figure out exactly how much power you do have and how you can use it in the most effective manner. And for those of you who are student leaders now who are sitting out there, really take heed to this, because there were things that were going on, and maybe I worked as hard as I could during that year, and then the year ended and I lost control of it. And then when I was at a point where I don't know if it was a maturity thing or if I just knew who to go to and what to do, I no longer had that power. Just by way of example, the big issue that hit during my year was that the regents were trying to get rid of affirmative action within the entire UC system, not just in enrollment, but also in their hiring practices. And it was one of those agenda items that was tabled and tabled and tabled. It was constantly old business. They would table it again. We kept waiting. With each regents meeting, we were prepared to go to it. We were prepared to speak, because by then we were able to speak and we had a voice. But they found just another way to keep us from being heard. And right after I graduated, I think I'd been graduated maybe 3 weeks. It was after graduation, but before summer school had started. School wasn't in session. They held an emergency session, voted on affirmative action, and said no more. And I remember thinking, I cannot believe that they did this. And being president was probably the best and hardest thing I ever did.
I was in an organization called the 100 College Black Men, and they offered the opportunity for one of us to run for, to start running for ledge council. And we kind of came up with the idea, someone ought to run for president. And of course, during that discussion, we realized there were 420 black students out of 20,000 or so registered students at UC Santa Barbara. We were about 2% of the population. And it seemed impossible, but I had to, go back to that. Anything is possible. By the end of that campaign, the person I was in the runoffs with came up to me and said, Wayne, you know what? I received more votes than any candidate in history except for one. And it didn't hit me until he looked at me with kind of disdain, and I realized that was me. More votes than any candidate in history. And what became one of my pressing issues was access to education. I remember as a freshman, I marched with Jesse and Dolores Huerta. We were there. I was in the room when SB 1 and 2 were passed. We did all the yelling and marching and everything, and we were nothing but an annoyance. It did nothing. It did nothing. Pete Wilson, Ward Conley, I was there. And I learned that lesson early on, that sometimes some of our methods don't get things done. I had to be smart about what we were trying to accomplish. So access to education was huge for me. What we did was spend more time in outreach efforts. And once I got into office, I was able to divert more funds towards outreach efforts. And instead of going the route of complaining to our administrators, I found our administrators to be extremely helpful. Michael Young, one of the greatest inspirations that I had as a student. Yoni was great. Our professors were great. Flax was great. I didn't have discouragement from there, but I knew that wasn't the route to affecting the change that we wanted to see happen. If I wanted to see more people here who had gone through the experiences that I had, we had to do something a little bit different. So we set up outreach programs, and that was our big thing. We funded student-run outreach efforts, and by the time I finished in office, 98, 99, correct me if I'm wrong, UC Santa Barbara had more black applicants than any of the UCs in the system.
It's definitely nice to see that some things have not changed. Most notably, maybe, is that Associated Students is still the only group attending our own events. We have, I think, 50 years of presidents here and 20 AS presidents. And there's like the presidents here, the staff, and then 6 other students. So as always, we think we're most important to ourselves. And 3 of those students, I think, asked me to pass out flyers in their upcoming campaigns, of which AS trains you very well to do, which is to pass out flyers. Among all your other list of skills, you become an expert passer-outer of flyers. And in hindsight, I've always taken every flyer from anybody that has ever passed it out to me. And I think what's special and unique about AS is it's really the one melting pot of the campus where everybody comes together literally and are butting heads. It's the place where we give out money, so all the different groups are trying to get it. And in my year, and an exceptional amount of money to give, it was almost $120,000 in the discretionary fund and finance board. And it's a really great experience because it's the one place I think you have just very frank and honest conversations. And they're not always pleasant, and they're not always fun, but it's a chance to really learn some lessons that I think you take with you the rest of your life. And I can promise you the one thing every AS president will tell you is that we didn't nearly get to accomplish or work on all the things that we wanted to. And part of your role about being a leader at the very top, I think, is about supporting other people's ideas. And certainly have your own vision, have your own agenda, have what you want to accomplish. But a lot of the times, the things you got to realize is this is a job also. And you're running an organization. You are literally the CEO of an organization that has a long and illustrious history. And a lot of times, it's not the big, grand things that you'll do that'll make a difference, but the consistent little things every day. Returning people's emails, taking a phone call, being considerate to everybody, helping other groups with the goals and aims that they want to achieve. And by doing those little things, you add to an organization that has a long history, and you make as much as a difference as you do in doing the large, big things that only you're going to do as well.
It takes a lot out of you, but, make sure it doesn't take too much out. I know a big thing is a lot of folks who are AS presidents are overly committed and don't end up graduating on time. Like, I know for me, kind of like what Wayne said when I first came in here, I didn't have the skills, academic skills to excel. So my freshman year I was on AP. And the second time that happened was when I was president. The running for office and all that stuff is pretty intense. It takes a lot of time, but you got to make sure to keep enough for yourself to actually, respect your intellect and actually get out there and go to your classes and, get out of here with a degree.
The year that I was physically in Associated Students, there was a lot that went on. We had the first all-female executive board, which was really exciting. A lot of strong females. We also pushed, and actually it's not a dumb battle, and I introduced myself for the first time to Michael Chester today, but I knew when we started to go to the academic senate meetings about the general education requirements. You have your general education requirements. Well, I got there and I was just a designated representative, and they said, okay, we're going to eliminate the non-Western requirement and we're going to make it a Western requirement. And I thought, we look at things from a pretty Western point of view already, and now we're going to eliminate the one non-Western course requirement. And I was reminded by people before me that Michael Chester and others had fought for an ethnicity department and had won just years, a decade before. And so, in addition to winning, and the non-Western requirement was not taken out, we actually proposed an ethnicity, gender, and queer requirement that talked about the intersection of all of these 3 things. And we pushed and we fought and we got a lot of pushback. And it actually is still a battle today on this campus. As recently as last year, Bill, who was one of your moderators, put that on his platform to run to make sure that we push for an EGQ, ethnicity, gender, and queer requirement. So it's still a battle here today. And if those of you who are still here are interested in working on it, there's a lot of work to be done. The clerical workers on campus went on strike. And I thought that this was a perfect opportunity for the student and the community interaction. So Associated Students, actually, the Legislative Council passed a proposal to support the Q workers, and we actually shut down all of AS in solidarity of not crossing the Q picket line. And so I think that was something that you could do. And the last thing I wanted to leave folks with is two things. One, it's really hard, like Mahadir was saying, to get all your studies done and to be involved in AS. And I learned, I would say, if not more, equally in AS and community organizing than I did read in classes. And I had a great opportunity with Carolyn Buford to do an independent study. And the independent study, she worked with me, and I got class credits to put together a AS President's Manual. And I think there's opportunities like that people can look into to combine your studies with the work you're doing. And then the second thing is I wanted to leave us with is to never underestimate the amount of power that you have as students. I opened up my book. This is my calendar from when I was president, and I started flipping through what the heck we did. And on April 15th, on the bottom is a check mark, not even under a date. It says, and I hope Chancellor Yang will not be offended, I said, call Yang. It says, call Yang regarding the regents, war debates, and another activity we were putting on. You have incredible access to important people in the University of California, and you are the important people as students.
One of the big things our year was student fees or putting student fee measures on the ballot. And so having to turn from, to look for alternative sources of funding for these programs that should be, or that are essential to any student success, was again being taxed on the students. We didn't necessarily have the luxuries of years before us, but my year, I remember coming in and our unallocated budget only had $9,000 for the whole year. And my own present account only had $300, which covered administrative fees, including calling cards to be able to organize at a state and national level. So that was a little bit of what we were struggling with. And my advice, to people out there is just get involved. Get involved in any capacity. We are privileged to be at an institution of higher education such as UCSB, and the resources we have here. I mean, it is really our collective responsibility to take action and do something. Do something to leave this place and our society in better shape than it was when we got here.
You talk about Santa Barbara, you talk about diversity. You don't see many people of color on campus. But in Santa Barbara County Jail, there's a lot of people of color who happen to exist in these neighborhoods right outside where we build our school. And not a lot's being done to help them. We build buildings, but nobody helps the kids. So therefore, we have this academic wall that exists between us and this community. This I learned from jail. You talk about, ethnicity requirements, and people are sitting there like, God damn, these black people again. They're talking about this stuff. Why do we need this? Because I'm in a classics class right now that's telling me that Greek civilization contributed everything to the world. They created a true alphabet by adding vowels to Phoenician alphabet, a true alphabet. And this is the jargon that goes on in your classroom, and you're wondering why we need an ethnicity requirement. Because in this day and age, you're fed this shit. Excuse my language. And so,
as you leave here and resume your lives, I ask that you remember the time spent reconnecting with old friends and connecting with new ones. Remember the time you spent discussing issues you're passionate about. And remember the time you spent reliving the glory days. I'd assume you don't get to do that very often. And like Bill James remarked, exchange email addresses, swap business cards, and keep in touch with one another and with us. Because I know I have truly been inspired today. And in the final leg of my presidency, I will keep your stories and your concerns in mind and continue to affect positive and lasting change in this community. Once again, thank you so much for your generous time and your memories. Thank you.
So where is our other fearless leader?
Who's that?
John.
Oh. I thought you were talking about Chaz. John's over here on time.
No.
Yeah.
Good morning. How you doing? Good to see you.
So, I can go to class at 9 and come back?
Yes.
Oh, good idea.
Sean, you're really videotaping?
Yeah, really.
Stop videotaping.
I don't lose my access card that way.
This is a really clever screen.
Why not RNA?
Yeah, I tried. I've tried twice and I can't get it to sell.
She was good.
Sean, I think that's guys are the cameras.
You see? Want to meet somebody else?
You're such a ham. More interesting than me, and I'm Rebecca.
So what were the major demonstrations going on during that time frame? Let's say.
Oh, the major demonstrations would be the SIG-Eps served beer at a party last night, so we have to put them on social probation. That was the kind of thing that was going on at that time. The demonstrations came on later. Really, we were a fairly quiet group. We didn't have any big demonstrations.
The main entrance is no longer the main entrance.
To
the building.
Right.
So it's kind of,
Regular fee high policy situation.
the whole history is like shifted.
He's a jerk.
Yeah.
He's about ethics. That's why I told him, I said, that's what I thought was important. That we have different political minds.
187. It might be 187 because. Well, but 94, 95. No, well maybe it was pre, maybe it was SP1 or something because well it's too early for it was certainly too early for it must be 187.
Well, here's what happened. There was a hunger strike. Remember those?
Yes. It's probably 187.
Casa de la Raza had a hunger strike and it wasn't working, and so that's when they decided that they were
Probably
going to.
187, I bet.
Yeah. That's when they decided that they were going to all get in each lane of 405 and just slow down to a dead stop and get out of their cars. They were going to alert the media. They had a press release that they were going to send the media saying it's going to happen tomorrow at this time, so there'd be helicopters.
Did you notice all the walkouts? It was awesome, actually. I was down there for the protest. I was down there for the protest, and then I happened to stay the next day on Origin 2 seconds. Right when, and now it's like touche, but back then it was like one of the first anti-immigration legislation. I couldn't get my hands on anything.
So you went to Whittier? That's
really? And so I'm driving down the street, it's my hometown, and I see all these kids come out, and I pull over, and I'm thinking for them.
Well, he was president. He was the other. He's the clone. He was the clone. How were you last week?
But you were the one that always came in and harassed me with those examinations. So 97. That's right. 6 years, and then I have
What are you doing here?
office coordinator.
My dad went to train at Boeing and was an airplane mechanic. He never really saw action either. He was in England, but he was a mechanic.
Oh, really?
He passed away about 5 years ago.
So there have been dialogues and even agreement on military exercises. China and Russia had some joint military exercises a couple of months ago. But none of this means alliance or return. No. The differences are too great. I do think Russia-China relations will
way advantaged by some economic improvements. Russia's oil and gas reserves, pipelines going to be built, both of each other. And there's a commitment for doubling or tripling trade in the next 10 years. On the economic front, therefore, there will be
Say hi. Say hi. Hi. Hi.
Is that the dedication of the tower there?
Yeah, that's the dedication. I talked to one of the students and he made the same.
That's him at 30 years old. He's 30, right?
Yeah, about that. And that store, and this guy he ran the radio station at that time.
He's the Elizabeth.
That's right, he's Elizabeth Robinson. I love it.
The student I talked to, after class, he said he was coming back there.
Actually, I got to know Vernon Cheatham. He was, as you can imagine, a pretty old guy when I got here in 1990. He used to be over in the locker room. Because he was still doing field. He was track and field. He was doing track and field in age group, so he was competing in his 80s something.
I looked at that picture, thought, good grief. That was the Associated Students office. It was a little trailer kind of building.
For a long time, they were squeezed up in an office up here in the center. And it's like, yeah, they got this building's a little bit.
Now you know I knew Lyle.
This is grandiose compared to
I
what
knew him
many
many years
Well,
ago.
this is the graduate student. That's over in here, and when we do the tour, you'll get to see the layouts.
I think I was in this building probably 10 years ago and did something like this.
That's right, you
came over there 10 years ago.
And now it's a little harder to fight because we have a lot more people who really have their needs met and so aren't really motivated to try to bring about change. You know? And they've grown up in communities that were very similar to UCSB, so they're just a little challenging. You know what I mean? So it's just a different vibe. Yeah, you should try to find Candace today and just talk to her about your community. Candace Brooks. She's an EOP.
honorary professor became, because I have lectured to became 4 different years, 3 weeks. And also lectured the first time I lectured.
Nice to see. So that's just the way it is. Cheers, Sean. Yeah, exactly. Things have changed.
Foot off Central.
Yeah, Tyler. All right, let's see cheese. All right. Yeah, so it was enjoyable though for the most part, eh? I'll say. Yeah. Okay. So, Sean, come on. Here we are, Associated Students Presidents Reunion. Brittany Oates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Right on. All right.
Maybe we were having private conversation.
Yeah.
So, wow, it was a big difference.
1,800 for the whole school?
The whole school.
Wow.
18,000 undergrads, 4,000.
It's got to be 3 or 4. I don't
4,000 grad students.
I just know that undergrads.
I get the voter list every year. So
You get what?
I run the online election.
Oh, it's an online election?
Elections are online now.
Oh.
Just for the last, I think, 3 years ago?
Yeah, just like 3 or 4 years ago we started.
Unbelievable.
Oh, it's so much easier.
Yeah.